I'm Kimberly Lawson Roby, and this is the Woman God Created You to Be podcast. The Woman God Created You to Be podcast is for the woman who wants to become the very best she can be in all areas of her life, and it is my sincere prayer that together you and I will be able to do just that. Thank you so much for taking this journey with me, and here's today's episode. As women, we sometimes ask ourselves if we're good enough. Now, of course, it is true that most of us do know that God has certainly designed each of us to be more than good enough. But nonetheless, many of us will still ask ourselves if we're a good enough wife, a good enough mother, a good enough friend, or even a good enough business owner, employee, or ministry leader. Because for whatever reason, it is human nature for us to second guess ourselves about one thing or another. It's normal for us to wonder whether we truly have what it takes to be successful in either our personal lives or in our professional arenas or in both. But here's the thing, God doesn't create average people. He also wouldn't place any passion in your heart that you're not capable of doing. Because even if you have no experience with what you believe you have a passion for, what I will tell you is this. If God has truly called you to do something, He will give you everything you need to be successful with it. He will give you the ability as well as all the wisdom and knowledge required, because while passion and purpose are two different things, most of our passions do coincide with our purpose. For example, even when I realized that I had a passion for writing fictional stories, I soon discovered that my purpose was to write books that women can both relate to and be entertained by. Then, once my first book was released and I began receiving feedback from some of my readers, sharing why they could relate to my characters and storylines, I then made the decision to always write about real-life social issues that any woman could relate to themselves, or they had family members or friends who could. Which meant that even though I was writing fictional stories, I was still writing about everyday life and trying my best to show how some of my characters had overcome the issues or problems they may have been experiencing. But of course, as a writer, no matter how many readers you hear from who are kind enough to tell you how much they love your work, you will also hear from readers who don't. And in the early stages of my writing career, I paid a lot of attention to the latter. And this was when I began wondering and feeling as though maybe I wasn't a good enough writer to be publishing books. I second-guessed what my elementary, junior high, and high school teachers, as well as what some of my professors in college had told me, and it wasn't long before I wondered if it was worth continuing. But then I thought back to the time when I had prayed and asked God to show me what I was supposed to be doing with my life and how He had, in fact, shown me that it was writing. And it was this truth that kept me going. Knowing that God had given me a purpose was the reason I believed I was good enough to be a writer, even if some others didn't. But then, just a few years ago, when God made my purpose much more clear, which is to help women become all whom He has created them to be, and when He gave me the idea for my book, The Woman God Created You to Be, I began second-guessing myself all over again. And I told myself that there was no way I had what it took to write a nonfiction book. I also told myself that if I could write it, I wouldn't be able to do it well. And of course, I even wondered, what in the world did I really have to say about my own life that would help other women? Because the last thing I wanted was to write something just for the sake of writing it. And what I wanted instead was to make sure that I had enough to say, words that would encourage, inspire, and motivate women to become the best they can be in all areas of their lives. But the more I continued to think I wasn't good enough to write The Woman God Created You to Be, the more God placed it further and further into my heart. And no matter how much I tried to push it away and stop thinking about it, I eventually began thinking about it throughout every single day of my life. Until eventually, I made up my mind to trust God. I decided that He knew what He was doing and that He would never lead me down a path that wasn't good for me. Now today, not only did I write and publish the book I'm speaking of, but you're now listening to the podcast of the same name. So please, if you're wondering if you're good enough to do any of what God has called you to do, please remember this. Not only are you good enough, my dear sister, you are much more than good enough. And best of all, you are fearfully and wonderfully made. Now for the 3 things you can do as it relates to today's topic. Number 1, keep your focus on God and believe what He says about you. Because please know this, God always knows what He's doing, and He never ever makes mistakes. Meaning, if He places a certain desire or passion in your heart, He has only done so because He knows without question that you're capable of moving forward with it. He also knows that if you would just make up your mind and get out of your own way, and that if you keep your mind completely stayed on Him, you'll come to understand that He has already given you everything you need to be triumphant. You'll discover that God has given you all the gifts, talents, and abilities you need to be successful with whatever you are trying to accomplish. You'll know that you're not just qualified, but that you're more than qualified, and that all you have to do is believe, trust God, and proceed with total faith. Number 2, surround yourself with people who believe in you even when you don't believe in yourself. If you've listened to some of my other podcast episodes, then you've likely listened to the one where I talk about my mom and my husband Will and how they believed in me and my first book, even when I no longer believed in either, and I was very much ready to give up on trying to get published. But even since I began publishing my work all those years ago, my best friends, Kelly and Lori, have always encouraged me to keep going, one book after another, no matter what. And Lori and my cousin Janelle have read every single book I have written as soon as I finished writing them. Then, when I told the 3 of them, along with my daughter-in-law Tasha, as well as 3 more of my dearest friends, Trisha, Trice, and Marissa, that God was calling me to write a nonfiction book, they all kept me encouraged and lifted up in that respect as well. So yes, please surround yourself with folks who believe in you, who will pray for you, and who will offer you genuine encouragement when you need it most. And number 3, know that you are more than enough. So, I know you may have heard this statement too many times to count, but if I could personally share this with you and every other woman on the planet over and over, I would. Why? Because this is our truth. This describes who we are as women, regardless of who we once were in the past or who we have become today. We are always more than enough because God says we are, which is the reason we should never think lowly of ourselves, and we should never focus on anyone else who has, for whatever reason, decided in their own minds that we're not good enough. Instead, we should simply believe what God says about us, and we should believe Him with every part of our being. And finally, here's a scripture to help you even further. I will give thanks to you because I am awesomely and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works, and my soul knows it very well. Psalm chapter 139, verse 14, New American Standard Bible, 1995 edition. Well, that brings us to the end of today's episode, and as always, I pray that our time together has been a blessing to you in at least some way. I also hope that you'll subscribe to the podcast and share it with others. And in the meantime, please stay safe and know that I am praying all of God's wonderful blessings for you and your family always. Thank you so much for listening, and if you'd like to receive further encouragement, please check out the companion book for this podcast, The Woman God Created You to Be, Finding Success Through Faith, Spiritually, Personally, and Professionally. Also, if you'd like to discuss today's topic or share a personal story, please visit me on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. Then, so you won't miss a single episode, please subscribe to the podcast or follow it through your favorite listening app or website. And if you would, please write a review and recommend the show to others. Until next time, much love, God bless, and thanks again.